Welcome to the entire plot of the Tandem Read, Part 10. We're officially halfway through the Tandem Read because we are doing 19 episodes. Today we're going to be covering Empire of Storms chapters 31 through 33 and Tower of Dawn chapters 32 through 35. And I will encourage you, if you are a big fan of the Tower of Dawn plotline, this is going to be the last part for the next 2 or 3 parts that we're actually going to check in on any of our Tower of Dawn characters, because parts 11 and 12 are going to be only about Empire of Storms, and then a pretty good chunk of part 13. So enjoy the Tower of Dawn sections of this episode while you can. Starting off strong with Empire of Storms chapter 31. So basically we have just confirmed that Rolf's magical hand map, that is a big part of legend, actually works now. So Aelin and Rowan decide to meet up with Fenris and Gabriel in their rooms at the end, and Aelin starts asking them about their situation with Maeve because she really struggles to believe that they have the audacity. Because remember, they made a deal with Rowan in part 9 to help out, which Maeve would never be fine with, but somehow they just found a loophole in their blood oath. It doesn't feel right to Aelin in this moment. As like a little jab back, Fenris makes a comment about her mortal lifespan, unless of course she's settling soon. So let's stop and talk about that for a second. Settling is something that immortals do. So they age naturally into their 20s, and then once they hit their 20s, they do something called settling, and that is basically when time kind of slows down for them, because like we know that Lorcan, for example, is like 500 years old, but he kind of looks like he's in his 30s. Settling is the moment where you stop kind of aging like a normal mortal human being, and you start to kind of have that fey sense of time being majorly slowed down. Now, the crazy part about that, and the reason why it's considered a jab, is because Aelin is demi-fae. She is half human, half fae. So we don't actually know if she's going to settle. If she would, it would be kind of soon. So it's just kind of a matter of time. And then, of course, there's also this awkwardness where Rowan is fae, and he's already like, you know, got a couple centuries under his belt, and he's gonna live a long time. So if she has like a normal human lifespan, she's gonna age and he's not. And that's obviously a little wrench in their little romantic plans. So we're hoping that she settles, but it also seems in this moment like Aelin doesn't love the idea of settling, but it's more like she doesn't want to age and Rowan doesn't. Although we do learn later, and I'm not really going to talk about it much in the episode because it's not really that important considering the actual scene in which we get that information, but it is possible for a fae being. It says so in Empire of Storms, end of part 1, that fae can choose to give up their immortal lifestyle. Like, they can choose to live a mortal life and age normally. And a lot of people like to pretend like the whole immortal versus mortal aging thing is a loop, especially considering some of the romances of Throne of Glass. It is not actually a loophole. I think some people forget that Sarah J. Maas actually does answer this question. It's just kind of in a fleeting moment and during a very important scene where something else big is happening, so I think a lot of people glaze over it, but that is a thing. Immortal people can't choose to have an immortal lifespan, but immortal people can choose to have a mortal lifespan. Also, another thing to note is Aedian's kind of the same scenario. Because Gabriel is fae and his father, but his mother was human, we don't know whether or not he is going to have a mortal or immortal lifespan. So we're just gonna have to wait until he settles to figure that out. A lot of things are said and happen during this conversation, but there's only a couple big things that I want to really point out. One of those things is obviously we don't know whether or not Aelin is immortal or immortal. Another thing is that Fenris actually offered to train Aelin Galathynius before Rowan was assigned. So he actually wanted to train her, but Rowan had to do it against his will. But lucky for them, it worked out. The biggest thing, however, that they discuss here is the fact that although they are working kind of in a loophole in their blood sworn oath to Maeve to hunt down Lorcan and all of that, they are limited by time, because if they see Lorcan or find Lorcan or anything, like, it kind of throws a wrench in their plans. So they're willing to help Aelin, you know, here and there in whatever ways they're comfortable with. However, the second Lorcan comes and kind of sets their blood oath into motion, they're gone. Like, they can't really stick around and be there for her, otherwise they'd be going against their blood oath, and that's just not a very good thing when someone goes against their blood oath. So there's a lot of stress to basically help Aelin as much as possible before time is up. Because I will remind you, if they break their blood oath to Maeve, they just die. Like, that's what happens when you break a blood oath. That's what would have happened to Rowan if he didn't swear the blood oath to Aelin immediately after he was cut off from Maeve. So they are not really interested in sticking around once Lorcan shows up and not completing their blood oath. Aelin then asks if one of their orders, along with killing Lorcan, was to take the word keys that he has gathered and bring them back to Maeve, and they refuse to answer, which I feel like is answer enough as is. But what they do tell her is they're actually here at Skull's Bay to collect a weapon for Maeve. It is fire lancers, and they're getting them through Rolf. Tower of Dawn chapter 32, that was a bit of a brain dump, so let's just head over to Yreen's POV as her and Chaol are in a healing session. Luckily for him, Chaol is actually making lots of progress, and today they even went on a horseback ride and then settled back at the Tor to continue to work on some more healing. Yreen suggests another trip to the library, specifically to ask Nusha how the library got the scrolls that they now have in their possession that are hiding in Chaol's rooms. So let's flash forward to them in the library doing just that, and Nusha asks if the scrolls and books is why certain things have been happening that are not great and why they have heightened security in the Tor. So she's definitely cagey about helping, but what she does reveal is that she gave everything to Yreen and Chaol. But there are rumors that out there in the desert, caves exist with such information. Caves this information came from. Most have been lost, but there was one in the Aksara Oasis. And then it says Nusha's look turned knowing as Yreen winced. So Nusha knows something about Yreen and Aksana Oasis. So after Nusha leaves, Chaol asks her, like, so what was that about? What happened at Aksana Oasis? Basically, it's a private land owned by the royal family. And given that information, I'm assuming you can guess what happened there. But basically, she says that if they were to ask anyone at the royal family to have access to it or to go there, it would definitely be very suspicious and it would raise a lot of red flags for them. And she knows that she could get caution to take them there, but she doesn't want to manipulate him like that. She's really just trying to get him off her tail at this point. She does not want to even remotely lead him on. Hasara, on the other hand, we'd feel a little bit less bad about manipulating her after she's been blackmailing Yreen, who's supposed to be like one of her closest friends. However, she would be, next to Argoon, probably one of the more dangerous of the potential heirs if they got wind of what they were looking for there and what it was for. Yreen decides in this moment that they should get something to eat and offers for Chaol to actually stay and have dinner at the Tor, but Chaol suggests that they go out to the downtown area to have some dinner together. So this is actually huge because that means that Chaol is willing to be in his wheelchair in a very public space and also kind of struggle through the concept of navigating a public space in a wheelchair. This is insane because he's had a lot of pride at this point. Until very recently, he didn't want to be near the barracks or near any other guards in his wheelchair until him and Shen got close and, Shen got him out of his comfort zone there. But like this is a big development. So basically they go out to eat dinner and they have a fun little date. Oops. Did I just say date? Am I wrong though? No. So while they're on this date, not date, they open up to each other and they get vulnerable a little bit more than they usually do in their healing sessions. And then it says, and as Chaol rode back to the illuminated palace across the city, he could have sworn that some weight in his chest on his shoulders had vanished, as if he'd lived with this his entire life unaware. And now, even with all that gathered around him, around Aderlin and those he cared for, how strange it felt, that lightness. I'm just saying, I have a feeling that Yreen has a really insanely strong, powerful, good influence on Chaol. That's all I'm saying. We're gonna jump back to Empire of Storms again for chapter 32. I apologize. In this episode, we are gonna have a good bit of whiplash going between the two books. But that's because I feel like this is kind of a transitional episode. Like a lot of little things are going to happen. One big thing at the very end, don't you worry, this isn't a waste of an episode, but a ton of big stuff is going to be happening in part 11 that's actually kind of insane. So this is going to be like a fun transitional point in both books. Anyways, this chapter is going to be in Adian's POV as he is deciding not necessarily like how he's gonna meet his dad, but like where he's gonna meet him, what he's gonna say, what does he want to say, what does he even want this relationship to look like? Does he even want a relationship with his dad? Like he knows nothing except for legends. His father is a legend and he grew up hearing legends of the great Gavriel, and then all of a sudden he's finding out that his father that abandoned him and his mother is this legend that he's looked up to since he was a kid. And you know, they say never meet your heroes, I guess. So yeah, it's a little, it's a little tricky. So he's talking to Lysandra about all of his feelings about this, and obviously she is being extremely supportive and basically says that she'll stand behind any decision he makes, and every thought he has is valid, and whatever decision he makes in the end is probably going to be the right decision for him. There's no wrong decision for him to make in this moment. She helps gas up Adian and cheer him on and, help ease his anxiety, and then goes with him to the tavern. See, Adian kind of had this moment where he didn't want Gavriel to kind of prepare or have this whole speech ready. He kind of wanted to just catch Gavriel off guard and just walk up to him and, say what he needs to say and see if he can get like a genuine reaction out of him too. He didn't want some great grand excuse, explanation, or story as to why he left. He just wanted to say what he needed to say. There's this moment where when Adian first sees Gavriel, he kind of freezes and almost like forgets what he's gonna say because all he can think of is now that he's actually looking at this legend face to face, he just sees himself in him. Like he's like, oh my word, this is undeniably my dad. Whereas Gavriel is looking at Adian being like, oh my word, he looks just like his mother. So I guess that means Adian's like a perfect 50-50, which is kind of sweet. But Adian's not feeling sweet. Adian is actually very mad. I want nothing from you unless you plan to help us, in which I cannot object to the assistance, but beyond that, I want nothing from you. And then Adian leaves and Lysandra follows him off. So that is the choice he decided to make in that moment, that, like if Gavriel wants to help in this war and, be a good father for once in his life, then he will not stop him. But he doesn't actually want to have like this buddy-buddy father-son relationship with him, because he does blame Gavriel and Gavriel's loyalty to Maeve as the number one reason that his mother died. We're gonna jump to Aylin's POV because she is absolutely exhausted. She is an unacknowledged queen trying to fight a queen's war. So things are a little complicated. She doesn't exactly have a ton of allies backing her up right now. She doesn't necessarily have a crown, a throne, or a kingdom. She's just technically the heir to a throne, but even then she's been denied that throne at the present moment, so she's not really working with much, but she's having to fight the war of a queen who has the support of her kingdom and a bunch of allies. So that's a lot of pressure on one person who's like at this point like 18 or 19 years old. But as if she wasn't already stressed enough, Ralph comes up and makes things worse. It's the latest report, locations of Morath's armies. They have moved into position, aid to the north is now impossible, and they stand poised to strike Eelway. And then he shows her a map depicting Erewhon's armies all over the center of the northern continent. Eelway is very important and very personal to Aylin, however, because it is the kingdom that Nehemia was princess of. And Nehemia still has her parents, and I think it's her brother or brothers, but she still has family in Eelway, and Eelway has been oppressed by Adarlan for years, and they're only just recently recovering, so they're definitely not going to be able to handle a strike from Morath armies. Obviously, this is a huge blow to Aylin, and she is probably going to handle it in a very interesting way, but we're actually going to jump back to Tower of Dawn, surprise, surprise, for chapter 33, and we're finally back in Nesrin and Sartok's POV as they're flying over the mountains in search of the Watchtower and the Karankui. Remember, those are basically the southern version of Stygian spiders. They're less civilized and they're more brutal. So they find their way to one of these watchtowers and then they land, and basically no signs of life yet. So they walk up to the watchtower where they see two owl symbols on either side of the watchtower. Okay, I am going to spell something out for you guys without actually saying it, because I feel like during Tower of Dawn, I have brought it up multiple times now. Owls have been mentioned in Tower of Dawn 4 times. If Sarah J. Maas keeps bringing something up, chances are it's important. Now, if you want to go back and rewatch, I definitely, every single time an owl comes up, I'm like, notice there's an owl here? That's such a funny thing to point out. I do that for a reason. So all I'm saying is you better be paying attention. So anyways, they enter this tower, the entrance between the two owl symbols, if you will, and they're extra careful because remember there's supposed to be all these like booby traps that were left there and they don't want to run into anything in these watchtowers. And sure enough, there are some trick staircases. There's like, you know, if you step on that one stone, like an arrow shoots across the hall. So Nesrin had this great idea where she grabbed a bunch of rocks from outside the watchtower and she's kind of throwing them always a couple steps ahead. She even saved Sartok's life a couple times because he's more of a warrior, okay? He's less stealthy. Nesrin has always had to be like more of a spy behind the scenes, whereas Sartok is like the march in the front lines warrior. So he's ready to just like march ahead and get the answers they need. And she's like, no, like we gotta go stealth mode. So they very, very slowly work their way to the depths of this watchtower. And just so you get like a fun visual for how intense these booby traps are, Nesrin says, remember that these traps are not for human assailants, but for spiders as large as horses who can speak and plan and remember. So there you go. So we finally get to the bottom of this watchtower, we get past all those booby traps, and then we get to basically a dungeon with a bunch of empty cells and a stone table that looks like it's where they possibly conducted torture. Yay. So they're looking around the room and they find some of the torture tools, if you will. Oddly enough, some of them are still sharp, which is odd considering the fact that no one apparently has been here for centuries. Nesrin then looks up and notices there's some writing on the wall and some weird symbols when they come to the conclusion that it is in the old Fae language. What do you think those odd symbols are? Guys, if someone ever mentions odd symbols that look like they're in an old Fae language, just assume they're word marks, okay? So they see these maybe not word marks, and Sartok turns to get his quill and parchment from Kadara's saddlebag so that they can write them down because Nesrin says she knows someone who can read these, so they decide they're going to write them down when they hear a female voice saying, there's no need to translate it. It says, look up. Pity you didn't heed it. Nesrin indeed looked at what emerged from the stairwell, crawling along the ceiling towards them, and tried to swallow her scream. Chapter 34, if you did not pick this up from the fact that it was literally crawling on the ceiling, this female voice belongs to a Karankui. Nesrin immediately pulls her bow and arrows to try to shoot at it, and Sartok even launches at the Karankui too, when a full-blown fight breaks out. And if you're not new to the series, I don't really do a breakdown of the fights. I basically just let you know any pivotal moments and who wins them, because that's all that really matters in summaries. But things are not looking hopeful for Nesrin and Sartok because the Karankui obviously is like the size of a horse, and it's very powerful, and it's very ancient, and it's huge, and it's disgusting, and it's weird, and it's gross, and I hate it. But out of nowhere, okay, this giant gray wolf bursts into the room and attacks the spider. So they're confused, but they're also not questioning it, so they book it out of there, straight up the stairs, and run straight to Kadara, hop on the saddle, and go to fly out of there when the wolf follows them out of the watchtower, and right behind him is that spider. The wolf is injured, so Kadara actually squares off with the spider, and of course wins the fight, because we love Kadara and she's perfect, and if something happens to Kadara, I will lose my mind, okay? So she kills the spider, and then the injured wolf shifts into a human form, and it is none other than Falcon. Okay, so Falcon is a shapeshifter. Chapter 35. So Falcon followed them as a falcon. Get it? Falcon, Falcon, Falcon. I always thought that was funny. Anyways, so he also informs them that Edge is aware that he's a shapeshifter, but Sartok is mad that no one told him because in his mind, shapeshifters are spies. And Falcon wants to tell him he's wrong. However, that one time where they had that really private conversation about all the Valg and the like, where they kicked Falcon, when they literally kicked Falcon out of the room, yeah, he just came back as a mouse and heard the whole thing. So he's like kind of proving Sartok's point, but he's trying to let Sartok know, like, I was just being nosy, you know, like I have my own agendas too, but we're on the same side. Sartok, however, has a very low view and opinion of shapeshifters. I feel like this is the first time we ever kind of see Sartok's, like, holier-than-thou, princely kind of attitude shine through. He's not really like that. He's actually a very good, like, potential heir. He's a very good prince. He's a very moral, right and just guy. But of course, kind of like how Dorian was in the first book, when you grow up being a prince, there are just certain mindsets you grow up with that aren't necessarily accurate. And this is kind of one of those things for him. And, you know, there are bad shapeshifters out there, but just because you're a shapeshifter doesn't mean you're a bad person. I mean, look at Lysandra. She's a shapeshifter and, like, arguably one of the best characters in the whole series. Sorry, that was maybe too much of my opinion. I try to steer away from giving too much of my opinion in these videos. But Nesrin basically turns towards Sartok and is like, hey, I get you have very strong feelings, but I'm going to need you to chill out because he just saved our life and he's kind of bleeding out right now. So if we could maybe prioritize getting him back to camp and try not to ridicule him for something that he can't help because he was just born that way, that would be great. Falcon just uses this as an opportunity to basically just like give his backstory a little bit to Sartok, I guess, but he basically just says he never actually wanted the gift. It was a gift from his brother and his father, who were also shapeshifters. He's also not an assassin or spy, although he has had his nosy moments in the past, but he really wanted to follow them to see if any spiders that they interacted with, if he killed them, that they would be the ones responsible for taking 20 years of his life. However, he is still mid to late 40s, so we can assume that this spider is not the spider that he made that deal with. After Sartok kind of cools off a little bit, Falcon takes a moment to thank Nesra for not being scared or skeptical of him, but she says, one of my friends is a shifter. In other words, Lysandra. And I feel like we don't get a lot of like Nesrin Lysandra moments, so it's kind of sweet to hear Nesrin refer to Lysandra as a friend, and I know Lysandra would feel the same way. So it's just a funny little tidbit I like to include in there. But right after Nesrin says that, Falcon passes out, so they decide to just head back to camp. As soon as they land, Sartok immediately goes to have a very serious conversation with Ej, not only about what they saw, but more to scold her for not letting him know about what Falcon actually was. And then, of course, Nesrin makes sure that Falcon gets the necessary medical attention that he needs. Then Nesrin goes to see Bort and shows her one of the blades that she took from the Watchtower. So remember how there were all those, like, torture weapons by the little, like, torturing altar area at the bottom of the Watchtower? Well, Nesrin grabbed one. However, when Bort sees this ancient Fey blade, which is what she identifies it as, with ancient Fey symbols on it, and both Nesrin and Sartok have black blood on them, because we learn that the Karankui are Valg creatures and they have black blood. And then on top of it, all she knows is that when they landed, Sartok was totally in a tizzy and very upset. Bort is like, clearly there is something way deeper going on here, and I want answers right now. So Nesrin swears Bort to secrecy and actually tells Bort like a lot of information about what's actually going on in this war. Later that day, when Nesrin and Sartok are able to meet up and chat again, he's a bit upset, to say the least, at Nesrin for telling Bort, but he's more upset still with her that she is continuing to keep secrets from him about the Valg, and she's just kind of like, these aren't my secrets to tell, and also, like, you're a potential heir of the family, like, do you blame me? Like, yes, I trust you, but at the same time, like, I can't just share Aylin's secrets about Erewhon with you just because I trust you. And she just kind of takes this as an opportunity to be like, you know, I wouldn't do anything differently. I still wouldn't have told you. I'm sorry you found out the way you did, but I don't regret not sharing things with you that you didn't really need to know at the time. But I'm hoping now that you do know more and you've seen more, that you understand why we are so desperate for your help and why it is so important that we do get this help. Because if Aelin loses this war and Dorian loses this war, do you think Erewhon's going to stop there? No, he's going to, like the King of Adarlan, if not worse, he's going to try to conquer the world. Sartok cannot really argue with this, so he just lets her know that after his conversation with Ej, she revealed that she found the location of 3 other watchtowers. So once the shifter is healed, they're going to go check out the other ones. And of course, Bort is demanding that she joins them as well. And this also is a tiny moment of growth from Sartok. He wants Falcon to come. He kind of shoves it off as like, oh, well, it's nice to have a shifter, like, might as well put his skills to use. But I think this is Sartok kind of not growing a soft spot necessarily, but deciding to trust Nesrin for trusting Falcon, that not all shifters are spies and bad people. And that was the last Tower of Dawn chapter that we will touch for a very, very, very long time, unfortunately. I'll miss Tower of Dawn for a little bit. However, so much gold is about to go down in Empire of Storms. Some of the most iconic moments, arguably, in the entire Empire of Storms book are going to happen in these next bit of chapters. So let's just crank them out. So Aelin just got the news from Ralph that Erewhon's forces are headed towards Eelway. Now, the number one reason she's really confused by this is that Eelway doesn't actually have a standing army. So they're literally just attacking a vulnerable, defenseless kingdom. To which Rolf responds that it's probably not an attack so much as an extermination just to get Eelway out of the way. So she's looking at this map that Rolf laid before her, and it says her eyes snagged on a small name along the western coast. Briarcliff. If you think that name sounds familiar to you, it's because it does. Remember Ansel Briarcliff? That name clanged through her, shuddering her awake. She rubbed her temple, staring at that speck on the map, considering the life debt owed to her. Her gaze dragged down south, to the Red Desert, where another life debt, many life debts, waited for her to claim. Now remember, in Assassin's Blade, this is where we met Ansel of Briarcliff. Remember what Ansel did and what Aelin did in response to what Ansel did. That is a life debt that Ansel owes Aelin. Also, she rescued the entire Assassin's Keep. So in the Red Desert, there are hundreds of assassins who also owe her a life debt. This is what she's referring to in this moment. So Aelin turns to Ralph and says, "You're going to give me your armada. You're going to. Arm it with those freelancers I know you've ordered, and I will ship you any extras to the Mycenian fleet when they arrive." And Ralph is like, Mycenians? Remember, this is the group that is apparently just legend, you know, like they were a part of Terrasen and then they were banished from Terrasen for not helping in a war. She just liberated their city that they ruled over that was south of Terrasen. Okay, that's the Mycenians, okay? So she just says that to Ralph, and Ralph's like, what are you talking about? But Aelin decides to call him out in this moment. You are the heir of the Mycenian people, and I have come to claim the debt you owe my bloodline. I think they've been hiding here in the Dead Islands for a long, long time, and you somehow managed to claw your way back into power. Also, notice earlier I told you to pay attention to the name of his personal tavern, the Sea Dragon, and that's basically their sigil. The Mycenians have a prophecy, okay, that when the sea dragons return, the Mycenian people will return, okay? It's like a big part of their legend, and why a lot of people don't even think that they exist. Aelin's like, oh, so you mean to tell me that all the, like, Mycenian Easter eggs just lying around your island are just, like, for fun? Like, you just have a thing for the Mycenians? You just, like, love their culture so much? No, you are a Mycenian, and I think you are the heir and leader of the Mycenians. She also then tells him about she liberated Ilium, which is the city that used to belong to the Mycenians, and she tells him that he can have it back and be king of it. Ralph, however, is not budging. He does not want to ally with her. He definitely does not want to give her his armada. So then the book says something very interesting. It says, she allowed a flicker of her magic to rise to the surface then, allowed the gold in her eyes to glow like a bright flame. Gavriel and Fenris straightened as her power filled the room, filled the city. The tendril of power she'd gathered rippled away in an invisible line. The world shuddered in its wake. A city bell chimed once, twice in its force. Even the waters in the bay shivered as it swept past and out. Interesting. Okay. Something very interesting just happened there. But Ralph went rigid, as if some pulse thrashed through his body. His eyes lifted, not to her, but to the windows, to the bells that had begun ringing in the twin watchtowers flanking the mouth of the bay. Aelin watched as black, darker than the ink that had been etched there, stretched across his fingers to his palms, black such as only the Valg can be. So, in summary, Aelin just had this weird moment where, like, magic just kind of rippled around her, and then warning bells start going off, and Ralph looks out his window to the water to see in the distance that there is a fleet of Valg coming for the island. So Ralph instantly is like, you did this. Like, you just summoned a Valg fleet here with your magic. You just sent them a beacon as to where you are, and now they're coming for my island. And Aelin's like, you know what? if you were my ally, I would totally stick around and help you out with this sticky scenario. However, we're not allies. So I think I'm actually just going to take my crew and we're going to head out. So Ralph is so mad in this moment because he totally got played by Aelin again. So he begrudgingly decides to ask for help. But he wants to be admiral. He wants to keep the entirety of Skulls Bay. He wants Ilium, which is the city south of Terrasen. And then when the war is over, he wants the official title of Lord. And also he wants to be paid. She basically agrees to meet his term and recognize all and any of his heirs as well as a lord, so she even kind of takes it a step further. And she said as his payment for allying her in this war, anything that any of his crew finds on any ships that they sink or take over during the war completely will belong to the Mycenaeans. So Rolf cuts a deal with her. He says, okay, if you help me beat this Valg fleet, then yeah, like all my fleet is yours. The Mycenaeans will fight for you in this war. We will be allies. So not only did we just confirm that the Mycenaeans are real, but we just confirmed that Ralph is the heir of them. And we just confirmed an ally for Aelin in this war, at least for the first big battle of this war. He does say, however, that it would take proper motivation to encourage the Mycenaeans who are in hiding to come and help. And she decides that he can just leave that up to her. She has a little scheme that she's been cooking up, because honestly, when is she not cooking up a scheme? So Aelin gives everyone their placements for battle and hands Damaris Gavin's Sword of Truth over to Dorian. And then from Dorian's POV, we see Aelin was insane, Dorian realized. Brilliant and wicked, but insane. And I feel like that is honestly the best way to describe what is going to happen in part 11. So I'm going to end this here. Thanks for watching this episode. I will see you very, very soon for part 11. In the meantime, if you are not caught up already, you definitely should get caught up, and you should subscribe so you get notified every time I post a new entire plot or bookish episode.